James Archibald Hope's The Military Memoirs of an Infantry Officer offers a vivid account of his experiences in the British Army during the Napoleonic Wars. Hope shares insights into battles, soldier life, and the camaraderie of the infantry, providing a first-hand glimpse into the challenges and resilience of military service. These are his words. Let's begin. Aranjuez, though not a particularly pretty town, is beautifully situated in a valley watered by the Tagus, which, entering from the east, winds through it towards Toledo, receiving various tributaries along its course, the most notable being the Jacama, which joins the Tagus a little below the town. Before the French invasion, Aranjuez was favoured by the royal court for a few months each season. As a result, the town possesses a greater degree of neatness and regularity in its streets and buildings than is typical elsewhere in the peninsula. The main streets are broad and intersected at right angles by smaller ones, giving it some resemblance to the new town of Edinburgh. However, the resemblance ends there, as the buildings in Aranjuez are miniature compared to the princely residences of the modern Athens. The most prominent building is, of course, the royal residence, which is situated a short distance from the lower part of the town, close to the left bank of the Tagus. It is a commodious and rather handsome structure, but when we visited, it had a sombre appearance, with the palace empty and everything around it in a state of great disarray. A few days after our arrival in Aranjuez, some of us decided to explore the palace and get a glimpse of its furnishings and interior decorations. Initially denied entry, we were about to leave when we spotted Sir Rowland Hill and his staff approaching the palace on a similar mission. Seizing the opportunity, we attached ourselves to Sir Rowland's group and were granted admission, accompanying him through every corner of the palace. With the guidance of one of the palace servants, Sir Rowland was shown various curiosities and given some insights into the behaviour of its former inhabitants. When we reached the Queen's bedroom, we were all astonished by its meagre and unimpressive appearance. Sensing our surprise, the guide began explaining why Her Majesty had chosen such a room over more fitting royal quarters. However, Sir Rowland, visibly disgusted by the explanation, abruptly left the room, eager to escape from what he must have considered a tainted atmosphere. This reaction was unsurprising to those familiar with Sir Rowland's character, as he was as renowned for his moral integrity and piety as for his courage on the battlefield. Every Sunday when the division was stationary, the entire unit attended divine service. To emphasize his respect for religious practices, Sir Rowland issued orders that all officers should appear in their best uniforms. The troops would form a square, and the large drum of one of the battalions would serve as a makeshift desk for the clergyman. On one occasion, while we were in Almendralejo, a very young clergyman, newly arrived from England, volunteered to officiate in place of our regular chaplain. Approaching the drum, the young minister seemed completely unsure of how to proceed, inspecting it curiously as though uncertain of its purpose. After some deliberation, he concluded that the drum must be there for him to stand on, and with one leap he planted himself on the drumhead, much to the astonishment of the entire division. After the initial shock subsided, a wave of laughter rippled through the ranks. Sir Rowland struggled to maintain his composure, while General Chown had to turn away. Expecting the young minister to lose his balance at any moment, General Howard kindly suggested, "Sir, I think you had better come down. I am afraid the drum will not bear you." Whether out of stubbornness or difficulty dismounting, the chaplain did not budge. Eventually, assistance was provided, and he descended safely, albeit with a newfound understanding of the importance of caution. As it became clear that Soult and Jordan would align their movements with the outcome of Lord Wellington's operations before Burgos, we eagerly awaited news of the fortress's capture. However, as days passed without any official word, unease began to spread. On October 22nd, the advance guard of Soult's army, which had left Valencia on the 12th, neared our cantonments. To oppose Soult's force of 50,000 seasoned soldiers, Sir Rowland Hill had a combined British, Spanish and Portuguese force numbering between 35,000 and 40,000 men. On the 23rd, the 2nd Division crossed the Tagus at Aranjuez, with the 1st Brigade moving to Colmenar de Orello, while the others occupied various villages along the river between Fuente Duena and Aranjuez. When we learned that a detachment of the enemy was advancing on Duena, our brigade was ordered to defend the passage of the Tagus at that location. Upon arrival, we found the Spanish corps of Generals Elio and Fryer bivouacked near the village. On the 27th, the enemy appeared on a height opposite Duena and dispatched a strong reconnaissance party toward the bridges. To prevent them from inspecting the bridge, the 60th Rifle Company took up positions along the bank of the Tagus and engaged the enemy's cavalry. However, the distance was too great for effective firing, and the enemy eventually withdrew. That day, some men from our brigade were enjoying the river when the enemy approached for their reconnaissance. Hastily warned of their approach, our men retreated from the water, but not before one cheeky fellow taunted the French soldiers, enraging them to the point that one Frenchman rode forward, carbine in hand, preparing to shoot the unarmed soldier. The sight of this cowardly act incensed our brigade, and the men erupted in a deafening shout of indignation, which seemed to paralyze the would-be shooter. Ashamed, he lowered his weapon and quickly retreated. Marshal Soult's intentions were now clearer, and Sir Rowland Hill began making preparations to counter his plans. The Allied forces were ordered to concentrate near the junction of the Jacama and Tagus rivers. All observation corps were withdrawn from their advanced positions on the Tagus, and on the evening of October 27th, the 1st Brigade left Fuente Duena, marching all night until 1 p.m. the following day, when we took up positions in Villaconejos. That evening, we resumed our march, crossing the Jacama at midnight by the Puente Largo, and took up positions at 4 a.m. on the 29th. 2 arches of the Puente Largo were ordered to be destroyed, and engineers began the necessary preparations as we crossed the Jacama. In the darkness, a horse's head struck a large drum, causing confusion in the ranks. Soldiers, mistaking the sound for an explosion, feared the bridge was collapsing beneath them. Panic spread, and for a moment, chaos reigned. Fortunately, the situation was quickly brought under control. Anticipating an attack from Soult, we stood to arms before daybreak, fully expecting a battle. Our position was strong, and we were relieved when Soult chose not to engage, likely recognizing our advantage. Instead, his forces cooked their meals in Aranjuez or moved toward Toledo, while others attempted to cross the Tagus above the town. Sir Rowland Hill soon received orders to retreat and form a junction with the Northern Army, which had been forced to withdraw from Burgos. On the afternoon of October 29th, we began our retreat, reaching Valdemora that evening. The next day, we passed near the capital and encamped 3 miles outside, on the road to the Escurial. Torrential rain battered us throughout the march and continued until sunset, leaving the soldiers drenched and exhausted, as they had no tents for shelter. On the 31st, we retreated to the Escurial, where 7 battalions were quartered in the royal palace, while the rest stayed in the town. Despite the grandeur of the palace, many of us would have gladly traded our accommodations for the rustic comfort of a shepherd's cottage. On November 1st, we retired to the foot of the Guadarrama Pass, which we ascended the following morning, reaching the summit after a 3-hour zigzag march. From the top, we enjoyed a stunning view of the surrounding countryside, though the north remained obscured. We quickly descended the western slope and bivouacked at Villacustine by sunset. Over the next few days we continued our retreat, reaching a position near Penaranda on the 6th of November. On the 7th, we crossed the Tormes River and encamped on a ridge half a mile from the river. As night fell on the 8th, the 1st Brigade received orders to recross the Tormes and occupy Alba de Tormes, defending it to the last. The brigade was supported by General Hamilton's division of Portuguese troops. Preparations were made for a vigorous defence, with an old castle repaired and garrisoned. The dilapidated Moorish wall surrounding the town was also strengthened, and the town was divided into 3 districts, one for each British regiment. Streets and buildings were barricaded, and reserves were kept in the town square. On the 9th, French forces began to appear on the heights above the town, and by 2 p.m. they opened fire from 20 cannons, pushing their light troops close to the walls. Despite the fierce bombardment, our soldiers stood firm, and the French, deterred by our determined defence, did not attempt an assault. After 3 hours, the enemy withdrew their artillery, though their infantry remained on the heights, keeping up a sporadic fire. General de Costa's Portuguese brigade suffered significant losses during the night. From November 10th to 14th, the 1st Brigade held its position in Alba de Tormes, while the French manoeuvred along the Tormes. Eventually, the enemy managed to outflank us, forcing a retreat from a position they dared not attack directly. After crossing the Tormes at a distance from Alba on November 14th, the Allied forces regrouped at the Arapiles. The French marshal, with his superior numbers, appeared more interested in forcing a retreat than engaging us directly. However, the poor weather, lack of tents, inadequate clothing, and scarce provisions took a heavy toll on our morale. Despite these hardships, the men remained eager for battle. On November 15th, we prepared for action, but instead of a battle, orders came to begin a retreat toward Ciudad Rodrigo. The army continued its retreat until November 19th, when we crossed the Ajoda River. The 2nd Division, however, remained in Spain, while the rest of the army retired into Portugal. After a few more days of marching, we entered cantonments along the frontier, with the 2nd Division moving to various towns in the region. By December 1st, we reached Coria, where we were finally able to rest after a long and arduous campaign. Language is entirely inadequate to convey even a faint idea of the fatigue and privations endured by a considerable portion of the Allied army during this ill-fated retreat. From the 6th to the 19th of November, our brigade suffered greatly. With the baggage in the rear, neither officers nor soldiers had anything to shelter them from the harsh weather. We had no money, being 8 or 9 months behind in pay. The men's linen was reduced to less than 1 shirt each, and their uniforms were literally made of shreds and patches. I can think of no better comparison for their jackets than party-coloured bed covers, for in my own regiment there were fewer than 50 jackets that had not been repaired with cloth of every imaginable colour. Our poor fellows' appearance, as may be expected, was far from impressive on parade, but as hideous as they appeared from a distance, the sight was 10 times worse up close. From a distance, only the patches were visible, but up close, hundreds of Burns' crawling fairlies were seen marching along the patches in countless numbers. Despite waging a war of extermination against them daily, from sunrise to sunset, they were not completely eradicated until we had been in cantonments for 2 or 3 weeks. Without tents to shelter them from the midnight cold, without a change of linen or money to purchase that luxury, or to supplement their meagre provisions, could the men endure being exposed day and night to relentless storms without suffering severe hardships? Those who doubt the truth of this should make the attempt themselves and be convinced. Staff officers are not the right people to judge these circumstances properly, as anyone will agree after reading the following facts. Soon after our arrival in Coria, the Marquis of Wellington addressed a letter to the superior officers of the army, calling on them to attend to the discipline of the troops under their command, which he claimed had deteriorated in the recent campaign to a greater degree than in any other army with which he had served or read about. Yet this army, he continued, has faced no disasters, suffered no privations that a little attention from the officers could not have prevented, and there was no reason for these hardships other than the necessity of exposure to severe weather conditions. However, it must be obvious to every officer that, from the moment the troops began their retreat from Burgos on the one hand and from Madrid on the other, the officers lost all control over their men. Irregularities and outrages of all kinds were committed with impunity, leading to losses that should never have occurred. Wellington attributed all of this not to a lack of ability among the senior officers, nor to the absence of tents, baggage, money, or the partial failure of the campaign's objectives, but rather to the habitual neglect of captains and subalterns in their duty, as prescribed by standing regulations and army orders, though he did not question their zeal, gallantry, or spirit. I admit that in some regiments discipline was allowed to relax to a criminal degree, but I cannot accept that the misconduct of a few battalions justifies the commander of the forces in Spain condemning the entire army with a sweeping vote of censure for offences many had never committed. It would be pointless for me to speculate on the reason behind the noble and gallant writer's decision to pen the letter of November 28th. But I am certain that if its release had been delayed a few days, it would never have seen the light. Instead of lumping the innocent and guilty together, the Marquis would have punished the guilty and praised, rather than condemned, those who had done their duty through all circumstances. Since this was not the course followed, I feel compelled, even at this late hour, to publicly and confidently assert that every officer in the regiment to which I belonged performed their duties with credit to themselves and benefit to the service. I also assert, without hesitation, that throughout the entire retreat the non-commissioned officers and privates obeyed orders with the same cheerfulness and enthusiasm for which they were always known. Their spirits were often deeply affected by hunger, cold, and fatigue, but despair never found its way into their hearts. Despite being clothed in rags and plagued by vermin, they remained driven by the same patriotism, love of country, and thirst for glory that had marked their conduct in countless previous engagements. Throughout all their hardships, their hearts stayed truly British. They faced every danger with heroic courage and bore their suffering without complaint. Before closing this subject, I must offer some remarks on regimental instruction, as I believe that the lack of such instruction at the time is largely responsible for the irregularities Wellington so severely criticised. Since ancient times, military leaders have recognised that periods of peace are the ideal times to examine and improve the military institutions of an empire. By refining these institutions, an army can be ready at a moment's notice to repel invaders, avenge insults, or protect allies threatened by more powerful enemies. However, many nations known for their military expertise have neglected their armies during times of peace, often paying the price in the form of invasion, defeat, and ruin. The Romans, for example, repeatedly made this error and repeatedly suffered the consequences. The hardships their armies faced from Hannibal's entrance into Italy to the Battle of Cannae can all be traced back to a lack of discipline and instruction during the period between the First and Second Punic Wars. Given that history often repeats itself, might not the same dangers that once threatened Rome also threaten us, unless we take the necessary steps to counter the harmful effects of prolonged inactivity on our military institutions? The British Army owes an immense debt of gratitude to His Royal Highness the late Duke of York for the many valuable improvements he introduced to our military system. For more than 30 years, this illustrious prince worked tirelessly to improve discipline, increase the comfort of the soldiers, and elevate the British Army's reputation in the eyes of the world. Through diligence, perseverance, and unwavering attention to his duties, he succeeded in raising the British Army to an unparalleled level of excellence in terms of discipline, bravery, and moral character. However, Given the immense scope of Britain's military responsibilities, it was impossible for the Duke of York to address every area in need of reform. It is therefore not surprising that our military institutions still require the attention of the noble and esteemed officer currently overseeing Britain's military affairs. The discipline of a battalion is always directly proportional to the competence of its officers. Therefore, it should be the primary objective of general officers and battalion commanders to ensure that all officers under their command are thoroughly trained in every aspect of duty they might be required to perform, both at home and abroad. This is especially important because many junior officers hold mistaken views on what military competence entails. Many believe that if they can handle a few minor regimental duties with some degree of accuracy, any further effort to improve their military knowledge is unnecessary. As a result, they waste years in frivolous pursuits, never bothering to explore the wealth of military knowledge available to them in various instructional texts. Consequently, many officers pass through long military careers without ever acquiring a deep understanding of regimental discipline and retire just as ignorant of the fundamental principles of their profession as they were on the day they entered the service. Such neglect not only causes personal frustration for the officers themselves, but it also undermines the overall effectiveness of their battalions. While an officer may be able to perform the more superficial aspects of his duties with a few basic lessons, true proficiency in drill and a thorough understanding of public and regimental duties can only be achieved by mastering the rules and regulations governing army formation and exercise. Achieving this level of expertise requires dedication and study, preferably guided by an instructor capable of delivering clear and effective military instruction. Without such guidance, an officer may spend 5, 10, or even 20 years in the service, without making significant progress, remaining as ignorant of his responsibilities as when he first started. Some may argue that it is the adjutant's duty to instruct young officers. While this is true, I must add that if the adjutant fulfills all the other duties of his position, he will have little time to devote to instructing officers. Based on my personal knowledge of an adjutant's responsibilities, I am convinced that he cannot provide the necessary instruction for young officers while also attending to his other duties. I believe that this responsibility should be transferred to the junior major and the senior lieutenant of each regiment. The duties of a lieutenant colonel commandant are numerous and important, and to burden him with additional responsibilities that could be performed by junior officers would only hinder his ability to carry out his duties effectively. Similarly, since the senior major often assumes command of the battalion in the lieutenant colonel's absence, it would be unwise to assign him this task. However, the junior major's duties are less numerous and less critical, making him an ideal candidate to oversee all drills and instructional activities aimed at improving the skills of junior officers. To support the junior major in this task, I propose that the senior lieutenant in each battalion be appointed as his assistant, with the temporary rank of captain and the pay of an adjutant. If the senior lieutenant is deemed unfit for this role, he should be given a few months to prepare himself. If he still proves inadequate after this period, the next lieutenant in rank should be appointed, and so on, until a suitable candidate is found. For those lieutenants who fail to meet the required standards after 6 months, it may be prudent to forward their names to the Horse Guards, so they can be encouraged to either improve or retire from the service, to make room for more dedicated individuals. A suggestion that promotions will be withheld unless improvement occurs within a specified time would likely motivate junior officers to make immediate efforts to improve. By doing so, we can avoid the need for harsh measures in the future, as no officer of honour would willingly return to civilian life with a blemish on his record. To further enhance the instruction of young officers, I recommend the formation of a company of instruction within each battalion, consisting of 40 privates and a proportionate number of non-commissioned officers. This company should be led by the captain-lieutenant, and only the best men should be selected for it. This would serve as an incentive for good conduct and could significantly benefit the service. Moreover, the exemplary discipline and performance of the company of instruction could serve as a model for the rest of the battalion to emulate in matters of duty, cleanliness, and intelligence. That concludes the 6th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.